Hello everybody, what is up? My name is Zero Solstice, and today is November 7th, which means today is partial doomsday for a lot of the Path of Fire release stuff. The elite specializations, whatever might be overtuned, core class and other specialization changes, so on and so forth. So, as I've been trying to do as regularly as I can, any major patch that comes out that brings change for the Necromancer, I'm trying to cover those changes, talk about my thoughts, my opinions, share that with you guys. Um, so I'm going to dive right into this one pretty quickly because pretty busy here at school. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this because I have other things that I really have to do, but I want to be able to cover this. I don't have. Previously, I had talked about instead of just using screenshots of the patch notes as the video footage for these kinds of talks. Unfortunately, I don't have that much video footage that I can use for 20 minutes to half an hour that I expect this video to take. Because I haven't been able to play the game that much, nor have I been playing the game that much, just due to college responsibilities. So, unfortunately, we'll just have to stick with the screenshots for this video, but that should be hopefully fine because this video shouldn't take too long because the changes are pretty straightforward. So, with that said, let's just go ahead and jump right in. So, the first change to skills is Blood is Power in World vs. World. This skill's PvP split has been extended to World v World and will now use the lower 20-second cooldown. So this is really straightforward. It goes from the cooldown that it used to have down to a 20-second cooldown with no actual change in functionality. So basically it's just an uptime fix for the fact that PvP plays faster than PvE. So it just they give the skill greater uptime to match the fact that you need access to it more often. And yeah, that's about it. I don't think this skill really gets any better with a lower cooldown in PvP unless you're using it mostly for the might aspect, but even that is a little, I'm not too sure about that. But, you know, I see why they made the change, and sure, whatever. Deathly Chill in World vs. World. This skill's PvP split has been extended to World v World and will now apply 1 stack of bleeding for 8 seconds upon chill application. So this is more or less the death of Deathly Chill that a lot of people have been waiting for. Deathly Chill in World v World, because it followed the PvP rule change a couple months ago, has been super busted and just really strong because you would have people cheesing it by running Full Viper's Greatsword with Rune of Reaper, and they would just unload all 5 shouts at the same time and put like an instant 24 stacks of bleed on someone, and along with like 12 seconds of chill, and it was really cheesy and it was just really unfun to play against, and it's gone. Deathly Chill is way weaker now as per this change. I was fully expecting that Deathly Chill would be modified into some sort of power-based utility, especially considering changes that we will see come later on in this patch. But I was expecting it to become some sort of like pulmonary impact based on chill application, right? Where it would do some amount of power-based spike damage whenever you applied pulm, or whenever you applied chill. I apologize, but they're keeping it condition-based. They're just nerfing it in World v World down to the PvP counterpart, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. I feel they might as well have brought it over to more of a power-based backing, especially given a lot of the upcoming changes. But you know, this is fine for now, I suppose. Deathly Chill was just really obnoxious and generally too strong as it was, so it needed this backseat kick. Manifest Sandshade fixed a bug that could cause this skill's targets to be lost due to proximity between shades or the casting Scourge. Made backend changes to increase the priority of shade visibility. So basically, people who have like effect LOD on and such should have an easier time maintaining the visibility of shades, which is good because it's pretty important to be able to see them since they do a lot of damage and a lot of Condi application. But the change here for fixed a bug that caused the skill's targets to be lost, yada yada. That's basically saying if you eventually got too far away from a shade and you used your shade abilities, the shade would literally not do anything, and that was pretty shitty, like pretty unfortunate. But so it's pretty nice that they maintain this. I assume that if you get really far from your shade, it still despawns entirely, but this at least means that you have that like that full range of motion, or like the sand shades are supposed to be for the concept of zone control. So it's good that you actually have the full range of motion now to be able to move all around the field while your shades are in play and have them properly function all that time. To be honest, though, even saying that, shades lasting for way less time in PvP and World v World makes this change almost negligible in those modes, to be honest. Because, I mean, by the time you summon a shade and get too far away from it to begin with, it's despawning in like 2 seconds. So, I mean, what's the point? So, I like the change, but it's somewhat unnecessary for most modes. I mean, you can even argue that it's unnecessary in PvE, right? Because odds are if you're distanced from a shade, so is, everything else that you might be trying to hit with the shade. With the exception of, let's say, world bosses, probably. So, this change is good, but probably not so important. So that follows through for Nefarious Favor, Sand Cascade, Garish Pillar, and Desert Shroud. However, Desert Shroud also has the change: increased the damage inflicted per strike of the skill by 25%. Increase the duration of torment inflicted on each pulse of this skill from 2 seconds to 4 seconds in PvE. So these changes make Desert Shroud a bit better for power base and a bit better for hybrid base Scourge, which is good. But the change of torment duration in PvE is to make up for some of the damage that we lost based on shades no longer stacking, Doomfire no longer applying on each pulse of Desert Shroud. Like, we lost a lot of our PvE rotation damage due to the bug fixes that came out a few weeks ago. So this is their attempt to try to give that damage back in some way, and that's good, right? That's really, really good, because we got really reamed with that bug patch in PvE performance. So it's good that they're trying to make sure that, we stay relevant, because we went from first place DPS to, I want to say, next to last. So I'm perfectly happy with being middle of the board DPS as long as we're in a position where people don't just kick us clean out of parties, which, to be fair, I don't normally ever really deal with, but it's a thing that happens. So it's nice. It's nice to kind of address that problem. There's still the issue that Necromancer doesn't bring a lot to everyone else, but this is fine. This is a good step towards keeping us viable. Power creep still exists, but there's no real way around that, unfortunately. Reaper Shroud. Increased life force consumption rate from 3% per second to 5% per second. Along with that, however, Life Rend, increased damage by 25%. Life Slash, increased damage by 30%. Life Reap, increased damage by 25%, and reduced life force gain per hit from 2 to 1.5%. Death Charge, increased damage by 25%, again. Soul Spiral, increased damage by 40%. Reduced poison duration from 4 seconds to 2 seconds. Reduced number of world finishers on this skill from 6 to 4. Executioner's Scythe. Increased damage by 33% on targets above 50% health. Increased damage by 30% on targets below 50% health. Increased damage by 28% on targets below 25% health. All of these changes are... they're pretty nuts, okay? So they're making it so that Reaper Shroud doesn't last as long, but you do so much more damage. So... Life Rend, Life Slash, Life Reap, that is auto attack chain numbers 1, 2, and 3, so the autos do a lot more damage. an average of 27% more damage across the board for the auto attacks. That's pretty sweet. Death's Charge increased damage by 25%. Death's Charge already saw a buff to its damage in the past, and it already hits like a truck all the time if you play full power base. I'm going to be talking under the assumption of full power base because that's the point of these changes. So increasing its damage by another 25%. We're talking about Death's Charge landing 8.5k crits on everyone easy. And that's a 5-second cooldown? My man, this is a house. I'm going to very well assume that this skill, because it doesn't say otherwise, still has plenty of pathing issues. But when it hits someone, it hits hard, my man. This skill is a bit of a terror, right? Especially with its uptime. So it getting another damage increase is pretty nuts. Soul Spiral increased damage by 40%. That is a lot of damage, but Soul Spiral really kind of needed it. It was a channeled ability. It was easy to kite. And all it did was just strike, right? It didn't like CC or anything like that. So, it really needed some power help. Along with that, though, they reduced the poison duration from 4 seconds to 2 seconds. They cut the poison damage of this skill in half. And on top of that, they reduced Whirl Finishers from 6 to 4. That means that synergies with Executioner's Scythe, Chill Field got nerfed as well. So here's where I take that step back and say, all right, so they nerfed Deathly Chill to still be Condi, but deal much less Condi. They nerfed Soul Spiral to do half of its previous poison damage. And they're nerfing the Whirl Finishers again from 6 to 4. So now you apply less chill from whirling in Executioner Scythe field, which means even less bleeds than before. I don't know why they didn't just go full power, to be honest. Why didn't they just change chilling Deathly Chill to be a power-based proc, right? Because with all these changes, Condi Reaper is very, very kind of dead at this point, right? The poison is 50% less damage. The chill is almost 75% less damage cumulatively. There's so much change all at once to the Condi application. It makes you wonder why it even still applies Condi, right? If you're going to specialize, because there's specializations, right? I feel like leaving poison on Soul Spiral at 4 seconds duration would have been better, and then cut the stacks down in size, because then you still maintain the functionality where Soul Spiral applying poison causes the healing reduction, even if it's not a worthwhile source of poison damage. That would have been a nicer total fix, because then it's utility on top of the power damage, but the Condi aspect of it is negligible, right? And I feel like they could have changed Deathly Chill to be power base to just completely... You might as well just completely gut that out, right? I feel you might as well just almost entirely make it so that if you're going to play Reaper, you might as well just play it power. Because if you're going to try it Condi, you're just not going to do damage. And there's still, like, the possibility that you can play this with some form of a hybrid spec, like the Mercenaries build that I really quite enjoy and throw around to a lot of people if they ask. But I just don't really see the value in losing so much percentage-based power damage in favor of a whole lot of nerfed Condi damage. So, I like a lot of these Reaper changes, but the Condi changes really have me feeling some kind of way. They feel very kind of... They don't want to remove Condi as a Reaper functionality, even though they're nerfing it very hard to the point where if you're playing it Condi, you're really handicapping yourself. Like, I'll have to try it myself again. It won't be nearly as cheesy as it used to be. I'm going to be completely fair. Prior to this patch, Condi Reaper, like, I was adept with it to the point where I would go in World v World and I could literally say, hey, roaming party of mine, watch me kill this guy. And 10 seconds later, he would be dead. because if you know how to properly punish an opponent, you land a chilling, you land an executioner scythe that they don't dodge and they don't have a stun break for, they die. They just die, right? So I mean, was it too strong? Yeah, it needed nerfs. Deathly Chill, especially, definitely needed nerfs. But nerfing everything else simultaneously feels really bad, and I just don't think it'll have the damage it needs to compete, especially with Scourge being like on your bar right there, just easily accessible. I don't think taking Reaper for Condi is at all worth it really anymore. So the changes are a little strange in that regard, but the changes are quite good in general. These Reaper changes are very, very nifty. And there's still a couple left that I didn't hit. It's just Fading Twilight increased damage by 8%, and Chilling Scythe increased damage by 21%. That is the Greatsword 2 and 3 auto attacks. Just got slight damage buffs, so that's cool. But the amount of time you or I ever spend Greatsword autoing is pretty negligible, at least in PvP. In PvE game mode, this is respectable. So, I'm not gonna complain. And the other changes to Sandswell. This skill can no longer be cancelled by other skills before the portal is created. So this is really good and really important because Sandswell had this really buggy functionality where if you basically started the traversal of Sandswell, but you used another skill or tried moving or something similar, the skill would go on full cooldown. You would teleport, but no portal would be left behind. And that was just really wacky and really silly, especially when you had other people trying to rely on your portal. And it's good that they fixed that, right? And fixed an issue where the displayed casting time did not reflect the actual casting time. So my assumption is that means that they increased the casting time on the written tooltip to properly match how long it actually takes to cast. They might have even cut down the casting time, I'm not sure, down to like a half-second cast time, because like the casting time was not quite what was written on paper. And I mean, even with whatever they say about its casting time on paper, its casting time still isn't like truly what's written on paper, because the skill has some weird functionality. And I love Sandswell. I affectionately call it Sandswole personally, but it's good stuff, right? It's really good stuff. So after all of those skill changes, we have the traits, which is a much shorter list, but still worth noting. So Reaper's Onslaught. The recharge reduction on Shroud skills is now calculated per target hit by Life Reap. So this is cool. It's generally a buff to the PvE element because whenever you're cleaving multiple targets with the auto attack chain of Reaper Shroud, now if you're hitting 3 targets, it gives you 3 times more cooldown reduction than if you're only hitting 1 target. So this is actually pretty sweet. This is a nice change. And Reaper's Onslaught sort of has its own like niche usage now, right? Where it's like you take it for the percentage damage increase in PvE, along with the fact that in PvE it has good functionality towards helping you deal with scaling threats, right? Because if you're cleaving out more targets, you need your skills to be up more often. So I like the fact that Reaper has a lot of this scalability concept built into it. I really appreciate that. Rending Shroud. This trait has been renamed to Awaken the Pain. This trait grants 5 might for 5 seconds when entering Shroud, and causes might on you to grant 40 power and 20 condition damage per stack at level 80. So this is pretty cool. I saw some individuals talking about how they felt like this trait should have made it so that might on you and allies around you grants 40 power and 20 Condi damage. The problem with that is that's selfish in the concept of what if they're playing Condi? Suddenly might is actually worse for them, right? While it could have been cool to make this some form of AoE aspect that helps others to give Necro like that niche party buff that people want to take you for, it actually would have been not beneficial for this specific functionality to share that with other people, because it actually doesn't help a lot of people, considering the majority, like a decent majority of builds in PvE are, Condi. So, I mean, this is a cool change. I like this. And I understand why it's 40 power and 20 condi instead of like 40 power and 40 condi, right? And that's because this is in the power line. You specialize for this. You take Spite to improve your power base, and taking the straight means that Might gives you more power than other things. To be honest, I love Chill of Death as a trait for my specific Power Reaper spec because it gives you a ton of spike damage, a lot of boon control, more chill uptime. Even still, I might take this. I might take this instead because when you're using Chilling Victory, when you're using Chilling Nova, when you're using Focus Offhand, when you're using a lot of ways to apply chill and therefore get a lot of might, having my might give me even more power is pretty cool. Whether or not this is worth that, we'll have to see. But might uptime in general on Reaper is disgusting, especially when you run with Heralds and other some such players around you. You basically always have 25 might. So this thing will pretty much always be giving the 250 additional power. I like this. I like this a lot. I do. I think this is pretty cool. This is pretty nifty. The fact that Rending Shroud has been pretty much removed may or may not be a good thing because I know a few builds used Rending Shroud in the past, at least PvE wise and whatnot. So the fact that this no longer exists might not be a good thing, but I think it is a good thing. I like what this does. It's nifty. It's cool. It's different. And I can already see that it has some homes somewhere. So I dig this. Reaper's Might. Fixed a bug that was preventing this from properly granting might on use of Scourge shroud skills. Really straightforward. Thank you. Doomfire. Fixed a bug that was preventing this trait from properly inflicting burning on use of Scourge shroud skills. Really straightforward. Thank you. Unyielding Blast. Same thing. Vulnerability. Thank you. Spiteful Spirit. The attack caused by this trait now converts 2 additional boons on targets below 50% health. This is gross, okay? This is really gross. And so I still don't like how there's just so many below 50% modifiers, yada yada, on Necromancer. Like, I want them to give us some other functionality that's more consistent, right? And this one is really gross because it's spiteful. It's the same Spiteful Spirit that it used to be, but now if they're below 50% health, you just rip them clean. And this is good, and I like this, but like, it's cancerous too. Like, the more boon conversion you add onto this, it's like, oh my god. I don't know what to say, dude. It's like, this is a buff, and I like it, but at the same time, it's like no one else is going to like this, and no one should like this, honestly, because so much boon conversion all the time is really, really painful. So, I don't know what else to say about this, just, ugh. Unholy Martyr. This trait's functionality has changed. It now causes the Necromancer to draw up to 5 conditions from 5 allies within a range of 600 to themselves when entering Shroud. When exiting Shroud, the Necromancer consumes up to 3 conditions, converting each condition into 7% life force. I like this change because now you can predict what it's going to do for you or your allies all the time, and you can predict when it will actually be useful to you for producing life force. And I like the fact that now it has more actual play to it because you can, by being based on a specific point of entry and point of escape, you can use this to perform specific tasks like, oh, we all just got, me and my party all just got hit by like a necromark. Here, let me just enter Shroud and pull the fear off of everybody simultaneously. Like, little things like that. And obviously that's not a fantastic example, but it's an example nonetheless. And it's like, it's interesting that you can like rely on it to be able to do things like that just at a whim by having a very specific point of entry and a large breadth of attack, being 5 condis at once. And the fact that it's when exiting Shroud, you consume up to 3 conditions, converting them into Life Force. It's slightly worse for actually maintaining Life Force or gaining Life Force, but it's more reliable in the Condi Cleanse aspect. And I think I prefer that, to be honest. So this Unholy Martyr change, I'm still not sure, honestly, this is a trait that you should really care that much about, especially when it's competing with Transfusion and Vampiric Rituals, but you know, it has a usage, and I'm honestly not sure how to feel about this trait. Just I feel like it just needs to do something else. Like the concept of shroud toggling causing condition management and life force management, I don't know, man. I'm not sure that that's just something we really need in the game, because it just there's almost never a point where it feels like it's something that we need as opposed to something else. And I don't know. What I do appreciate, at least, is the fact that the change with Unholy Martyr consuming conditions for 7% life force when you exit Shroud, this means that it actually does function favorably with Plague Signet. It used to not. It used to be if you were... so here was the synergy, right? You would run Signets of Suffering so that Plague Signet pulled 2 conditions instead of 1, and it would pull conditions while you were in Shroud, because you would maintain this the passive Signet ability when you were in Shroud. If you were running Unholy Martyr, the conditions that you pulled with Plague Signet would not give you the life force for pulling a condition from an ally. However, with this change, this makes it so that while you're sitting in Shroud with Signets of Suffering and Plague Signet, you pull condies from allies, you leave Shroud, you consume those condies, and you get the life force for it. And that's pretty cool. I appreciate cross synergy, right? Like, I really wanted it to be so that the old Plague Signet and the Plague Signet and old Unholy Martyr had synergy, so that you could Signets of Suffering pull 2 condies every like 3 seconds and just gain a chunk of life force every single time, because that would have been nuts, right? But it's good that it didn't do that, although I wish it had, because just having cross tree and cross trait synergy is important. And now it exists, right? Now Unholy Martyr is favorable with Signets of Suffering and Plague Signet, and things like that are important to me. It's important that a class is able to have synergy with itself. That's really important, because it's good design, right? It's important that a class is able to function in almost every possible way within its own kit. So I don't know how I feel about this trait just existing as it is, but the change is good. Signets of Suffering. This trait now grants the passives for all equipped Signets while in Shroud, regardless of whether those Signets were on cooldown prior to entering Shroud. This is really nice. So I think this is a change as a concession to the fact that previously, if a Signet was on cooldown and you entered Shroud, you would not maintain its passive. The thing is, if it came off cooldown while you were still in Shroud, you would not regain its passive. And that was not that cool. So I like the fact that as a Grandmaster trait, they're making the concession to, you know what, if you're in Shroud, you should just always have, you should cut out that poor functionality and replace it with always good functionality. Where now, if you're in Shroud and you have the Signet, you always have the passive. And that's awesome. Removed the 20% recharge reduction. This trait now causes all Signets to recharge by 4% each second that Shroud is active. This is sweet. So it's easy to make Shroud on average last 5 seconds or longer just by doing your basic cooldown rotation inside of you enter Shroud, you let's say Reaper. You enter Reaper Shroud, you activate Infusing Terror, you death charge at your opponent, you Executioner Scythe them, you Soul Spiral inside of that, you death charge one more time, maybe put a couple autos in, drop Shroud. You can spend an easy 8 to 10 seconds doing all of that. That's already 40% recharge reduction as opposed to the 20% recharge reduction that you used to get. That is insane. That's actually really sweet. So like now Signets, where it used to be you would get punished a bit for using your Signets because you would no longer have the passives. Now you always have the passives if you're in Shroud. So you're incentivized to actually use these signets. And on top of that, sitting in Shroud causes the signets to come back even faster so that you can use them again. This is a really, really nice change, and I really dig this. So, Signets of Suffering, man. I was a fan of this trait before, right? Like I liked the concept. The major problem with Signets of Suffering, to be honest, is the fact that to use Signets of Suffering properly, you have to give up a bunch of your utilities to Signets, which were effects that incentivized you to not cast your utilities. So you would basically be playing, let's say, Power Reaper with no utilities and just a bunch of like passive bonuses, like, oh, I have no stun break, but I have a bunch more power from Signet of Spite. So the fact that now you're incentivized to use those actives and you don't really get punished for it as much, I like this change. I dig this. It's build defining. It's like it's interesting. It becomes better with your class mechanic. Like I like this. This is a good step in the right direction. You can argue with me that the trait is still bad, and that's fine. But I like the fact that, at least from a design standpoint, it incentivizes you to use the skill type without making the skill type inherently worse, while also being good and actually better with your class mechanic. I think all around this is good changes for Signets of Suffering. And the final change is Plague Sending. This trait had its functionality changed. It now causes your first strike after entering Shroud to transfer 2 conditions to your target. So this is a good change, right? It appears that it is no longer actually a smaller Plague Signet, which means that it's no longer a passive stun break, which means Necro now no longer has a passive stun break. You can consider Last Gasp in Soul Reaping, the passive Spectral Armor, sure. But I liked the fact that this one was more active in terms of you could finagle your build in a way to where you could actually cause a strike while stunned. And if it crit and triggered this trait, then it would actually stun break you. And ways that you could do that were, say, it meant that you could take Suffer as a Reaper instead of Plague Signet, and Suffer would do somewhat some of the same things as Plague Signet. Not as great, but, it would have some of the same functionality and other functionality. But if you used it properly, it would trigger Plague Sending, which means that you would get mini Plague Signet on top of Suffer's effects, on top of the stun break. And that was cool, right? Like, it was interesting that you could do stuff like that. And another example was if you got stunned, you could enter Shroud, trigger Spiteful Spirit. Spiteful Spirit crits a guy, triggers Plague Sending, stun break. Like, that was cool. But I think that's gone now. And now instead of 3 conditions, it transfers 2 conditions. And instead of being based on crit, it is based on attacking after entering Shroud. So they made Plague Sending generally worse, which is fine because it was really punishing to anyone that wasn't a Necromancer for being Condi. So, like, I can understand this change. It's fine, right? Being the first strike after entering Shroud means it's no longer dependent on crit, which means that this gets better for a lot of builds. Like, a lot better for a lot of builds. You're no longer pigeonholed into needing to run something like Sigil of Intelligence just to guarantee that you're able to crit every so often to trigger this. This is generally a good change because it makes Plague Sending less punishing, but more reliable, and also more readable from an opponent, right? The opponent used to be mind games or partial counterplay where it's like, okay, here's how I do this. I Scepter auto you 3 times so that I put Bleed, Poison, and probably Torment from my Superior Sigil of Torment on you, and that'll trigger your Plague Signet, or your passive Plague Sending, with relatively minimal impact because it's just going to transfer 3 Condis. That's it. And that's how you used to counterplay it, at least as a Necromancer. It's like, okay, I know how to read this. And you could do that in other classes too. As, like, say, an NG, you would be like, okay, I auto attack you with my pistol twice and I shoot Poison Volley or Static Shot at you and you trigger. Okay, fine. This is whatever. But the thing is, when you consider classes like those where it's like, well, Static Shot is one of my highest damaging abilities and it's on a high cooldown, it seems a lot worse than as a Necromancer saying, okay, I Scepter auto you 3 times. It has no cooldown. It takes a second and a half to do that. So, I mean, this is a good change because it's less punishing to a lot of classes that are bad at Condi management, but good at Condi. So, NG as a good example. But it also makes some matchups that were bad worse. I think this change makes the Mesmer matchup just strictly worse than it was. But in general, this is a healthy change, and I dig it. So that covers all of the changes, right? In general, I don't like the fact that Condi on Reaper got nerfed rather than being gutted. I think it would have just been better off getting removed entirely. I don't like the fact that Necro still has not been given any meaningful way of party buffing for, say, a raid, right? We have a lot of might generation, but PS Warrior does that better. We don't have any buff such as pinpoint distribution from an NG. So, I mean, I'm still not sure how we fare on that front. Our damage got buffed, so now we're viable again. Like, we've always been viable, right? But now we're more competitive, and that's good. People can't complain that we're playing our class in PvE. Power changes to Reaper are nutty, right? Like, this is gonna do so much damage, and if you don't believe me, like, Executioner's Scythe is going to average 10k crits now with a ceiling of 13 to 14k crits. What the That's nuts, okay? If you don't believe me, the Power Reaper is going to do a lot of damage. Try it right now. It does a lot of damage. Some good changes to Scourge in general. I like some interesting changes to traits. All in all, it was a lot of changes to Power Reaper. Not a ton of changes to Scourge, but mostly just bug fixing in general, performance upgrades or updates, and that's good. All in all, it's a pretty good patch for us. I'm just slightly disappointed at the fact that we still don't have any meaningful like party support, really, like a lot of other classes do. We didn't see any changes really to core Necromancer. There were a couple trait changes in the core lines, Spite and Curses and Blood Magic. We still haven't seen any changes to Death Magic. We still haven't seen any changes to our weapons. We still haven't seen any changes to base Death Shroud. Like, there's a lot of things about core that could be improved to help remedy issues that exist in Reaper or in Scourge, but we're just not seeing a lot of those yet, and that kind of sucks, and I hope that we see some of that stuff in the future. The barrier changes that were listed outside of the Necromancer notes are really quite good for us as well. Scrolling up, those changes specifically were barrier. The duration before decay begins has been increased from 1 second to 2 seconds, but the time for the barrier to decay has been reduced from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. So barrier lifetime is the same, however, barrier sticks around longer but disappears faster. So it decays faster, but it doesn't start decaying for longer. So, I mean, it's a good change in general. It helps barrier-based support from Scourge because now it feels way less bad to put your barrier on someone a little early, and it feels less bad to stack some applications of barrier because the full size of it sticks around a bit longer. In general, there's a lot of good changes here for us. There's not anything we can really complain about. It's not like Scourge got nerfed a whole lot more or anything. For better or for worse, it's not like Scourge got nerfed a whole lot or anything. So, I mean, a lot of the changes were pretty much just to Reaper and a couple core things that would be usable with Reaper. Things such as Reaper's Onslaught, Running Shroud becoming Awaken the Pain, Spiteful Spirit, stuff like that. Signets of Suffering. So, interesting changes in general. I like what we're seeing. There's still things I would like to see in the future, but that is for the future. I've been talking for 40 minutes. So I'm going to cut this off at this point. I want to thank any of you guys who are watching this for watching. I hope any of these insights were interesting or useful in any way to you, so on and so forth. I'm interested in the patch. I'm interested in getting out there and trying some of this stuff out. Power Reaper is going to do tons of damage. But until the next time, my name is Zero Solstice. And as always, get out there, have a good time, enjoy the patch. Good luck being a Necromancer main, and have a wonderful day.